So I think maybe, thanks, Ren. Thanks, Felicia. Okay, good morning, everybody. Let's get started. My name is Kate Davis. Really happy you've chosen to join us this morning. I'm seeing some familiar faces from last week. Welcome back. If this is your first session for the CCP Speaker Series, welcome. Today's session is being offered in both English and French. So there's a button, look with the little world, it says interpretation at the bottom of your screen. If you want to click that and select whichever language you'll be listening to today, that would be great. And before we get too far into our session, I would love to welcome Dr. Stanley Wilson to say some opening words this morning.
Tansi. Tu tembetik hanin buju washte oki ciego que planete drin quinzi bonjour. Buenos tardes. Greetings to all of you, each one of you and all of you. And I'm going to do a smudge. I guess you'll be getting we're doing a virtual smudge. Okay, the smudge is to our ancestors to protect us while we're doing ceremony or rituals, especially. Anyway, at this time of the year, I used to hear the elders give thanks to Kisemantu Kamatagus, the great spirit, the great mystery. Thanks for the end of the summer up here anyway, where all the medicines that needed to be picked had been picked. We give thanks for that. All the berries and other plants, foods that were collected, and some were dried to last the winter. We give thanks to that. And all the animals had raised their young, and we give thanks for that. And all the birds, the ducks and the geese likewise would also raise their young to perpetuate their kind and to the next generation. We give thanks to that. And all the seeds from the plants likewise have been the plants had produced the seeds so that there be more plants the following year. And the fish and all the what we depended on for for keeping us alive. The warmth of the sun during the summer to make all this happen. The fresh water that had been given to us early spring, and the soil had been warmed up by the sun. We give thanks for all that. We especially know that without the cycle of nature and the cycle from one season to another, our life depended on that. And that if we take care of our relatives, they will take care of us. If we take care of the earth will take care of us. So we are likewise giving thanks for all the continuation of the cycle, and we anticipate coming of winter when the earth will be covered with a soft blanket of snow, which we appreciate because the when the sun returns again to our lands, that the snow will melt and give us the fresh water, and water that froze will turn into ice, and the ice will also give us life. And that at this time we are going to be resting too, like the rest of the natural cycle. So that's what I used to hear the elders giving thanks. And I know I left some other parts out, but that's as much as I could remember for now. Hey, thank you.
Miigwech, Dr. Wilson. Thank you for your words. Welcome again, everybody. My name is Kate Davis, and I'm speaking to you today from my home on the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I am a planner at Alderhill Planning, and I'm joined by a big chunk of my team today. We've got Ren Roberts and Felicia Fisher and Phaedra Jenner all here to support today. So if you need any tech assistance, please feel free to message any of us. We're more than happy to help. And yeah, we're just really excited to welcome you. This is the second session of the CCP Speaker Series, Virtual Speaker Series. The goal of this series is to offer a virtual space to community planners to learn together and to connect, especially during a time when that's been really challenging over the last year and a half, almost 2 years. And today's session is on land-based healing. And we're really thrilled to have two speakers joining us. We have Cara Basil and Linda Laurier. This is the second session of our series. Last week, we had Jessie Hemphill talking about virtual engagement and facilitation. So if you were here for that, welcome back. And if this is your first time joining, it's really nice to have you here. We're hoping to host another session in the new year, so we'll make sure to get some info out to everybody, hopefully before the holidays, with another registration link. And one more time, in case anyone missed it, and I'm sorry for the noise upstairs, we are hosting today's session in both English and French, so make sure that you select your language from the interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And we will be recording today's session in both languages. So we'll follow up with a link, and you are welcome to distribute it to anybody in your network as well. In just a few minutes, we'll get started with our presentations. We'll first hear from Cara and then from Linda. So I'll ask that you hold your questions until after we've heard both presentations, and then we'll just open the floor for open dialogue, discussion, questions for our two guests. And finally, I just want to say thank you again to Indigenous Services Canada Manitoba office, who have supported and sponsored this series. We're really grateful to Val and to Angel and to their team. I also would love to thank again Victoria Laughlin for all of her support, as well as for Catherine Belland, who I have asked 1 million questions to, and she always smiles at me and says, okay, I will answer your question. So I'm really grateful. And I think let's get to our first presenter. So I would love to introduce Cara Basil. Cara is Secwepemc with lineage to Bonaparte and Eskedem First Nations. She has a bachelor in sociology and Aboriginal studies and is in the process of completing a master's of arts in interdisciplinary studies, community engagement, social change, and equity at UBC Okanagan. Cara is passionate about decolonizing spaces through a lens of health and well-being. And we personally are so thrilled because Cara is the newest member of our Alderhill Planning team, where she works with us to support a variety of communities in a number of different and incredible planning projects. So we're really thrilled to have her on our team, and we're really thrilled to have her here today presenting on her work. So Cara, I will hand the floor over to you, and Ren is going to share your slides.
Kukshachim, Kate, thank you so much. And I want to say Kukshachim, thank you to Dr. Wilson for opening us up this morning, sharing those words, sharing your prayer, and for the smudge. Though we're virtual, can definitely feel all that good energy and blessing over here, where I'm coming in today from Tecumseh to Secwepemc territory, where I currently live and work from in my home. And so I'm just really grateful to be here today with all of you, to join in this space, to have an opportunity to talk about land-based healing and from the perspective from the Secwepemc Nation. And so thank you so much, Kate, for my introduction. Again, my name is Cara Basil. I grew up in Bonaparte, which is a small community in the interior of British Columbia, just about an hour from Kamloops in the Secwepemc Nation. And so I grew up there with my grandparents, Tom and Irene Basil, my mom, Elaine Basil, and my sister, Chandra Basil. And had the opportunity to grow up on the land, immersed in our Secwepemc ways, practicing all sorts of different things and hearing the language. My grandparents were both fluent speakers. And so it's always so beautiful to hear others speak their language, as well as, from what I've learned, the language comes from the land. And so that really grounds us in who we are as Indigenous peoples when we are able to speak our language, to hear it, to learn it. And so I've been on that journey for some time as well. And so today, I just also, before I get going, want to acknowledge that yesterday was Indigenous Veterans Day, and to acknowledge all of those from our nations who fought in many wars and served for our people, and the sacrifices that they made to do that. I had my great-great-grandfather serve in World War II, Joe Basil, and so I hold him up high for what he did and for all the others that are out there, and to know that in a couple of days on Thursday will be Remembrance Day, as we acknowledge all those veterans that are out there. And so just to get started, so I was thinking of our Secwepemc prayer this morning, and I was sitting there looking at it and reading it, and just knowing that it's about being grateful for the land, being grateful for where we are, to ask for protection of all living things, as Dr. Wilson shared in his own words in prayer this morning, and how those beliefs and practices trickle throughout Turtle Island, or throughout Indigenous peoples and nations, as we know. And so we share this really beautiful perspective and worldview of taking care of each other and taking care of the land. And that's so important. And so I'm actually sitting here just to keep grounded with this eagle feather that my grandparents, my kia, beaded with the 4 colors, as well as brown for the land, blue for the water. And she gifted this to me when I was elected to council for Bonaparte. And so that was a number of years ago when I was 22 years old. I was very young, but I learned so much. And I also have this feather here as well that was gifted from my nation, the Secwepemc Nation, for the work that I got to do and the work that I'm going to share today. And so I am grateful to have these here with me for what they represent, to be able to smudge my home, to smudge with others, and to just ask for protection around that. And so I just really wanted to acknowledge that. And so with that, we can pull up my slideshow and we can get started. All right, so this picture here, I just want to point out before we flip it. So that photo is actually from Bonaparte's Lookdow's, from our home over there. And each of the different photos that you'll see are actually from Bonaparte for the most part, in these different slides of the land there. This was a sunrise, actually returning home after the 2017 wildfires, and was just so grateful to be back at home after being evacuated for the whole summer. And it was so difficult to return home after seeing the devastation to the land that happened after that wildfire, as it was so close to home, to like literally to our homes. So I just wanted to point out that that is where that photo came from. And so this presentation, as I've titled it here, Self-Determination and Land-Based Healing, using a community-driven and nation-based approach to uphold Secwepemc wellness. And this presentation is really a story. It's a narrative of our lived experiences as Secwepemc peoples. It has a particular focus on what land-based healing means to us and how we have taken a community-driven and nation-based approach to revitalize our ancestors' happiness. And I say that because I think so often we talk about revitalizing culture and revitalizing language. But really, when I look around at our communities, our families, individuals, we've never lost those practices and those ways. We still have them throughout our communities, throughout our nations. And though we may not be immersed in them as much as we were before, when we do practice them, we're really revitalizing our ancestors' happiness. And I take that from one of our knowledge keepers in the nation who said that, Sunny Prairie Chicken, who is such a knowledgeable and incredible young man from our nation. He's my cousin from Lookdow's. And he said that when we're out on the land, we're doing these things, we're revitalizing our ancestors' happiness, which is a connection, a sense of belonging and wholeness that comes from being on the land and our relation to it. And so when we think of our language, how it comes from the land, our languages are really relation-based, and they are focused on relationships to all living things. And that comes from that teaching as well, all our relations. When we say that in our prayers or in anything that we're doing, all our relations is the relationship that we have to everything and how we take care of it. And so this is our story from the Secwepemc Nation of a decolonized approach to planning through self-determination of what wellness means to us and how we can support our own and each other's wellness. So we can go to the next slide, please. So this is just a quick overview of what to expect in this morning's presentation. I'm going to go through a bit of our collective history to really ground the discussion, introduce you to Secwepemc Ulu, which is our Secwepemc Nation, share a bit about the health governance structure in BC, just to give a little bit of context around how this approach came forward and what it looks like over here in BC for First Nations in BC. And quickly talk about, what is land-based healing? What does that mean in maybe a Western worldview and a Secwepemc or Indigenous perspective? And that community-driven and nation-based approach, and what we did in Secwepemc Ulu for land-based healing and the path forward that we have identified together. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. All right. So this passage here comes from the 1910 memorial to Sir Wilford Laurier. As you see here, it says Kukukbi, and Kukukbi means chiefs in our language. The 1910 memorial to Sir Wilford Laurier is a foundational document. As our tribal chief, Cookbee Wayne Christian, has shared, it tells a story of the relationships between settlers and interior nations over the past 200 years from our point of view. For those who may be from the interior or even from BC, or recognizing that we have folks joining from all over Canada, it's a really important document to look to and to see and understand the relationships between Indigenous peoples in the interior and settlers over the past 200 years, and understanding how the relationships have shifted over time. And so it tells the story of what the Cookbees call the Sema-Ui, or the real whites, who were fur traders and the first contact of settlers, of which respected our governance systems, laws, and customs. And as the Cookbees state in the memorial, they did us no harm and ultimately had a friendship with them that became long lasting. And so these were the first settlers that came to the interior, who acted as our guests, as they should, when they first came here to these lands. And then the story then tells of the other whites that came, miners who settled on these lands and stole the lands and everything on them. This relationship was not a relationship at all like the first Sema-Ui. And the theft of land, the implementation of government policies and laws that would assert control over Indigenous peoples ignited a legacy of fighting for Indigenous title and rights. And so from this memorial, this story that our Cookbee are telling, we see how the relationships with the settlers began and were civil, and there was friendship, and they acted as our guests, and then it shifted to having these other settlers come who were miners and were extracting resources, were taking over allotments of land and really disrespecting our ways and how we govern, how we practice different things on our lands. And so that turned into this fight, like I said, for Indigenous title and rights. And that's really what this memorial is grounded in, is Indigenous title and rights. And so this passage that's here on the screen is one of the concluding statements in the memorial. And upon my first time reading the memorial, it stood out to me. And so it reads, "So long as what we consider injustice is withheld from us, so long will dissatisfaction exist among us, and we will struggle to continue to better ourselves." And so as we talk about land-based healing today, it is important to acknowledge how our people have suffered due to theft and loss of land that we once thrived on. It's important to know that our beliefs, laws, and customs all come from the land. And when land is taken away, when we see the land is suffering from resource extraction, our wellness suffers because we've lost that inherent sense of belonging and knowing, almost, because we no longer have that direct connection anymore. It's been lost through these generations from that theft of land. And so this passage resonated with me because I know we're having the same conversations today that happened 100 years ago. And we continue to struggle to better ourselves because of the profound loss we've gone through with each generation. And so earlier, Dr. Wilson said that if we take care of the land will take care of us. And so we've seen through climate change and through all these things happening in the world that we haven't taken care of the land like we should be, or how we would typically do that as Indigenous peoples due to this loss of land over generations. And so I'd also like to acknowledge that the man sitting in the front row furthest right is my great grandfather, Boissel, or Basil David. And so back in the day, I don't know why it became a common practice, but often people's first names became a last name for the family. So his traditional name was Boissel, and then he was known in English as Basil David, and that switched to be Basil, which is our family line. And so he was the hereditary chief of Bonaparte, and that hereditary line runs through my family. And it's been amazing because over the past year, I've actually ran into some others whose great grandparents are also sitting in this photo, and to know we have crossed paths and are also working together. So it kind of makes you feel like you're right where you are meant to be. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, so to give a bit of background on who we are, Secwepemc peoples and our nation, this map is of Secwepemc, which means the Secwepemc nation. And Secwepemc means the spread out people. As you can see, we have a large nation, the largest in BC, and it spreads out over 180,000 square kilometers throughout the interior of BC. So it goes all the way up to the Williams Lake area, and there's 4 of our communities that are in that area, comes down all the way to Cache Creek, comes over to Kamloops, over to Enderby and Chase area, all the way past there to Salmon Arm, and all the way to Invermere. And so this is our traditional territory, as you can see on this map here. You can see the traditional names of the communities as well. Well, it's kind of hard to see in this little map here, but these are our communities today, and we have approximately 15,000 members who live within Secwepemc, but also in other areas throughout the world, as we've all come to know. And so historically, we had 32 campfires, as we previously called them, but today we call them communities. And today we have 17 Secwepemc communities. And so I had the honor to work with 16 of these communities through the Secwepemc Health Caucus in my role as the traditional wellness lead, where this work that I'll be talking about today derives from. And because our nation is so large, we also identify our communities by region and have 3 regions, which are the lakes, which would include all of the communities over from Invermere to Enderby, Chase, and Salmon Arm area. We have our central region that includes Kamloops, Simp, which is Barrier, Bonaparte, Whispering Pines, High Bar. I hope I'm not forgetting any in the central there, and then all the way up to the Williams Lake area that's known as our northern region, where we have Eskedum, Tlechel, Hot Sulph, and Canham Lake, Dog Creek, Soda Creek. And so we have these 17 communities that span throughout the interior of BC. And today you'll find our people out on the land practicing many of our ways, like hunting, fishing, berry picking, traditional medicine, and lots more. So this is our nation. I'm so proud to be Secwepemc and to have been nurtured throughout my life to know who I am as a Secwepemc person from both my family, community, nation, and now to share that. And so let's go to the next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned before, BC is a little bit different in terms of health governance. And so with folks joining from all over Canada, I thought it would be important to share a bit on our health governance structure in BC. And so BC is the only province to have a province-wide First Nations Health Authority. And the First Nations Health Authority delivers health services and programming that were formerly delivered by Health Canada's First Nations and Inuit Health Branch. The First Nations health governance structure belongs to First Nations in BC. So when we say that, it is completely driven by our communities. And so really it is intended to operate from the ground up versus being this kind of hierarchical structure that we may see otherwise. And so it consists of political representation, leadership, and advocacy through regionally appointed members of the First Nations Health Council. It includes technical advice and capacity development from community health directors and health managers through the First Nations Health Directors Association and the First Nations Health Authority, which again provides health services and programming to communities. And so this is where the term community-driven and nation-based comes from. And what does that mean? Which honestly, when I started at the Secwepemc Health Caucus, that was in our funding agreements, it was in our directives, and I had no idea what it meant. And I sat trying to wrap my mind around it for quite some time until I finally was at this nation level and understanding how everything that we were going to do at the nation level had to come from the communities. It had to be directed from the communities. And so when it's community driven, it's each of our 17 or 16 Secwepemc communities telling us what their needs are, telling us what wellness means to them, how we hold each other up, all of those different things. And we come together collectively as a nation to move forward together, to advocate together, to ensure that we're getting all of the resources and capacity within our communities to do this work, and to have all of those pieces in place to actually have wellness throughout ourselves as individuals, but our families, our communities, our nation, and the land, throughout all of those pieces. And that's what is so important as well in looking at this slide, is the First Nations perspective of health and wellness. As we so often know in Western worldviews, there's the medical perspective that focuses really on the physical body of what health is to people. And so sometimes we get caught up in, okay, I'm healthy if I'm physically well. Whereas in a First Nations perspective of health and wellness, it is holistic. And so it's interconnected to all of these pieces that you can see in that diagram there. There's a circle that starts with the individual. It spans out to the relationships that we have with one another, to our family, to friends, to loved ones, to our community, to our nation, to the land, and the values within that of how we maintain wellness. And so when we look to our languages that come from the land, that come from the relationships that we have, in Secwepemchin, we actually have a word that there is no word for health. I should say, and start with that. We don't have a word in Secwepemchin for health. It actually is Kwakwelt, which means to be whole. And so when my grandmother, my Kia Irene, taught me that, she said, we don't have a word for health because it means to be whole. So when you look within yourself of all the things that you need to be healthy and well, it's going to be different for everyone. And there's going to be all these pieces to it for your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health and wellness. And so it's a whole other worldview that comes into place that I can see now Western perspectives are starting to catch up to. And that's starting to be a thing through a public health approach, through when we say holistic in the English language and all these different things, we're seeing Western medicine or science, or however you want to put it, Western knowledges catching up to those Indigenous worldviews that have always been there, knowing that that's what health and wellness is. And so as I go through the presentation, you'll see a little bit more of what that community-driven and nation-based approach is. And I'll get into that quite a bit more of how we took that approach through planning for our nation and all of those different pieces. So I'll just take a moment here. I had something that I was going to say and I can't remember now. So I'll just leave it at that for this slide. That was just kind of a quick overview of health governance in BC to understand why we were taking this approach in the Secwepem Nation, because we have our communities, as I mentioned, the 17 Secwepem communities. And then from a nation level, we had our Secwepem Health Caucus that was supporting this work from the nation level. And so that's how we did this work from a nation level, working with all of our communities. And that's a part of the health governance structure in BC as well, of how we got funding in to do it. And so let's go to the next slide. All right, so as I mentioned, just to quickly touch on what is land-based healing, when we think of this through a Western lens or what we find in the literature, land-based healing is a culturally defined practice, program, or service that takes place in an urban, nature-based, rural, or remote location on a land base that has been intentionally, spiritually cultivated, honored, and respected. So we're seeing often now throughout BC that land-based healing is a priority, and we're seeing it throughout Canada as well, and how other nations are doing land-based healing, where they're using funding to ensure that there's ways to get people out on the land as a measure to take care of one's health and wellness, especially around those who may struggle with addictions, or those who struggle with mental health and all those different pieces, because it really helps to go to the land and have these opportunities that typically might not be there in community, as things have changed so much throughout the years. But then I want to share this Secwepem lens that we have. And so the land, what we call Tamich, and this is shared from Dr. Ignace, Ron Ignace, and Dr. Marianne Ignace in our nation. And they state that is not about real estate or private property. It is about Secwepemc land in all its dimensions. It's the land our ancestors experienced and marked out for us, and it comprises the living creatures on our land in their relation to humans, as well as the way that this land spoke back to countless generations of our ancestors who passed down their remembrances, and the way it continues to speak. And so in that lens, in that Secwepemc lens, when we go out onto the land speaks to us. The land cleanses us. I met with a friend yesterday. She's another Secwepemc person. And she said, I just needed to really go for a walk the other day outside on the trail and let the wind brush me off. And that's exactly the sorts of things that we find when we go out onto the land. And whether we're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, I think this is something that we can all relate to, of how when we go out on the land, we connect, we find that we can relieve some of our stress or tensions that we find in our physical body, to breathe in that fresh air and to let things go. And so when we're out on the land, we're connecting in that way, we're listening to the land, we're hearing and seeing all of the beauty that it holds. And so that really is a Secwepemc lens of land-based healing. We can go to the next slide. Okay, and so all of the work that we did, again, coming back to this community-driven and nation-based approach to land-based healing and really what that looked like. And so to me, it's this cycle, and it's so important that self-determination is at the forefront of that at the nation level, we weren't telling communities what it was going to look like. They were telling us, individuals, families, community, leadership, health directors, all those involved were determining what were our steps, were guiding us forward, and that we were decolonizing how we were going to do this. So often in our communities, in our nation, in our organizations, we're bound by the funding that comes in and is so restricted in how we can spend it within only a year or 2 years, rather than having sustainable funding. So it's really difficult sometimes to initiate certain projects or programming, but then also to keep momentum because the funding goes away so fast. And so in this approach, we really thought about how do we decolonize that way, and do things differently so that it's actually meaningful for all of our communities and our nation. And like I mentioned, revitalizing our ancestors' happiness. How are we really going to make this meaningful to each Secwepemc person so that they have the opportunities and the access to being on the land, no matter where they are, and learning the ways if they've been disconnected from their community or their families or whatever that might be. And with that comes intergenerational healing. If we can get families out together, or if we can get people helping one another, in comes that intergenerational healing, where we're working together, we're supporting one another, and we're all coming together for what wellness means to us. And this is a cycle that's really never ending as we approach this work. Next slide, please. Okay, so moving into specifics of the planning aspect of this work, these were the steps that we took to decolonize the planning process, which is a really important piece I think of, because I think when we're planning in community, we kind of get stuck on like this really technical way of doing things. And so it was so important to kind of step away and take a moment to reflect on actually what is going to work for our communities, for the nation. And so we started with a nation analysis. What is our vision for land-based healing, for Secwepemc wellness? And it was so funny because I went through and analyzed all of our plans, all of our documents, and I was like, okay, I see these themes. I see that, our nation wants to have this big wellness center one day. And so I went to the leadership and the health directors and was like, how about we build a building? And they're just like, what do you mean? Like, we need to get people on the land. This doesn't really make sense. And so that was kind of scrapped. And then we just pulled out from that, knowing we literally need to get people on the land. And so we started moving things forward in a different way. That wasn't just going to be putting up a building that might not do anything for our people right now. And so then we went through recognizing and exercising self-determination, as I mentioned, and this was done through receiving funding to do the work and equitably distributing it to each of our communities with a funding formula that recognized whole community populations. When communities typically receive funding, they receive it for those who live in community, but we distributed it so that they were receiving funding for their whole population, whether they lived in community or away from home. And they had the reign to do whatever they wanted to do with that funding for land-based activities. And then from that, we use that as a planning tool to host these virtual planning sessions to get each community's vision, and then went into developing the Secwepemc land-based healing plan, and also did a video so that we could have our oral traditions held up in how we can share orally, instead of just doing this typical reporting that we would normally do with filling out a written report. We wanted our funders to see exactly what we were doing. So we can go to the next slide. So with each of the planning sessions that we did, these virtual planning sessions, we met with all of the communities online, and we had a graphic recorder there in Zoom. And this is Decolonize's graphic recording that was developed with them. And so it shows what it means to them to move towards wellness, what land-based healing is. As you can see, they have in their language is born from the land. And so that was really important to capture all of those different things that are important to Decolonize. And so in this presentation, I'm just showing one from each of the regions. So this is from our central region. We can go to the next slide. And then this is Tla'achu, otherwise Williams Lake First Nation, from our northern region of the nation. And it was really important to me to share Williams Lake because they had such a beautiful story where they took the funding to build a community sweat lodge. And that turned into a whole healing center that they're still developing right now. They have had a community member who's a Red Seal carpenter come in and build this healing center with the sweat lodges. And he told me his story of building it, that sometimes he would just have to stop and take a minute and cry because he felt like he was healing through doing this work. And to me, that was so meaningful to know that it had such an important impact on those who were in community and how they were using their funding in what worked best for them and were actually really helping their people support their health and wellness. And so this was Williams Lake, and we can go to the next one. And this is Nisconlith from our Lakes region. And so they really talked about, connecting generations, that our laws are written on the land and we need to be connected to the land. We are the land. And I thought that was so beautiful over from our Lakes region here, this community Nisconlith, and what land-based healing looks like to them with all of these different pieces that are here. And the communities loved having that graphic recording piece to be able to see their visions captured visually so that they could take that back to community and share it throughout their communities too. And these all went into the nation plan. We can go to the next slide, please. I'm moving a bit fast because I know my time is almost out. So sorry if I'm speeding through this last little bit. And so another piece of how we really decolonized, how we were going about things, how we were planning, and how we were implementing this program was through an on the land mentor apprentice program. So we used some of our funding to be able to support nation members go out on the land where there was a mentor, so someone who was a knowledge keeper or an elder, and they were teaching younger people, or even sometimes mentors were younger than their apprentices, and just sharing different Secwepemc ways of things like hunting and fishing, basket making, doing traditional medicines, all of these things. And we had people signed up all the way from the age of 5 to the age of 81 was our oldest elder that was a mentor from Asketum, and was so amazing to see that diversity in age range. They all received monthly honorariums for their time. And a huge piece of this was that it brought members home. We had members reach out that lived in urban areas like Vancouver and others who maybe didn't grow up in community. And they're like, this is so amazing because we can come home and learn these things that we didn't get to grow up with. And so instead of having things that were like really technical, like reporting and curriculum, they determined what their teaching style and how they were going to go about it looked like. And their reporting each month was just photos that they would send in of the things that they were doing so that we could just include that in our report to the funders. And so the photo behind there is actually one of our groups that are out fishing. Next slide, please. All right, and so this is, we held virtual ceremonies and gatherings. So we had people over Zoom and in the communities who were doing these things like raising our spirit ceremony, sacred fire ceremony, honoring ceremony. And we did an on the land virtual gathering where I shared all of the different graphic recordings from communities and the vision forward that we wanted to move toward, so that all nation members had an opportunity to share their voice into the plan of what that final plan was going to look like. And next slide. And so coming full circle with all of those different pieces, this is our vision forward for Secwepemc land-based healing, starting with having sustainable funding, building capacity in community, and having those meaningful partnerships with places like Interior Health, the First Nations Health Authority, Health Canada, the Indigenous Services Canada, all of those pieces so that we have the resources within community and at the nation to do this work. But then creating safe space in communities where each community can have a healing center, has the resources and the funding and all the supports to support community members healing their families and the whole community. And having our Secwepemc ways of being, practices, and knowledges guide us throughout all of this work. So that includes the seasonal rounds, revitalizing our Secwepemc Chin language, taking care of the land, and really protecting it so that we can continue on. And nation building for collective healing. So having all of those pieces in community, and then finally being able to build up to have Secwepemc wellness centers throughout each region. And then also one hole where people can go to access if they're struggling or they just need to be out on the land, they want to learn, any of those sorts of things, so that it's there for them anytime that they need. And so this was our vision forward that's in the final land-based healing plan for our nation. And so we pulled all the information together that we gathered through the virtual sessions, through communities, all of the mentor apprentices, everything, and built the plan from there. And so that plan is finalized now and going to be implemented going forward from here. Next slide. And that is everything. Cook-Stretchum, thank you all so much for letting me share this space and sharing with you all today. I will pass it over so we can have our next presenter.
Thank you so much, Cara. I could listen to you talk all day. I loved what you said about there being no word for health in Secwepemc, but that the meaning is to be whole. That's gonna stick with me for sure. And I'm sure that other folks have questions. I'm just gonna ask that you hold them until we do our second presentation, and then we'll open the floor for dialogue and questions and discussion. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker now, Linda Garunya de Laurier. Linda is from the Snipe Clan Mohawk Nation at Ganawage, Quebec. She is currently Ganawage's CCP coordinator, and she owns her own consulting business, Junhi Yo. Linda has spent a good part of her life working with community, so facilitating workshops for various groups or teaching, coordinating community projects around healing, building and planning, or Mohawk language and cultural promotion and development. Whatever the form is, she's really passionate about community. She's also an avid lover of the outdoors, of natural medicine, and of all things earth-based. So it's really fitting that she's here today to talk about land-based healing, and she's going to speak to reimagining contact, building relationship with ourselves and the land in the community. So welcome, Linda. The floor is yours.
Nyawa. What gonna waradim se wagwegum Garunya hawi jets wagatini to got you guess to know dating waradim ne agwegu sa oyer that you hunzade the no nyawa ti the gwahungarum ne giga Aurihiwage ayamas skana gahage the no in what the gari de hage So thank you everybody for being here. And before I say what I said, can we just say wow, that was an amazing presentation. Could you feel how big that was and how much it encompassed and how much emotion and feeling went into that? The true heart of her people, which Cara has the heart of her people in her heart. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So thank you. Wow, it was amazing. What I just said was thank you for inviting me to this land, this virtual land. And thank you to everything, as Dr. Stan, hey, Dr. Stan, it's nice to see you again, said this morning, everything in this natural world and everything that we're connected with and has continued to carry on its responsibilities that creation has intended for it. And for us to continue to be whole, rather than healthy, to continue to be whole together as we move through this important work that we're doing for our communities and our nations. So thank you again. I loved everything you had to say, Cara. I was like, oh my God, she's saying everything I want to say. And it's so amazing. And I'd like to roll it all back, because the reason I'm here is to look at it from a different perspective, right? Everything that you said, right? About creation, about the ancestors, about revitalizing happiness, about all of the things that you said. We're going to talk about that today in the time that we have left, but we're going to talk about it from a personal perspective. We're going to talk about how it feels in our bodies. From one perspective, everything that you said was so amazing, and your nation is so lucky to have you working for them. And where does that belong in each of us? It's overwhelming to think that all of that exists. And how do we access that for ourselves? Did anybody else feel a little overwhelmed at the prospect of doing that in your own community by yourself in your little CCP coordinator hat, to get all of that work done? We're going to talk a little bit about that. And I was thinking, how the heck am I going to do that in 20 minutes? So I just want to tell you a story before we go any further. And I wasn't sure if I was going to tell this story, but I think it fits. And some of you might have heard this story before. It's nice to see a bunch of familiar faces and some unfamiliar faces as well. I'm glad to get to know you. So I was out in Alaska probably 10 years ago or so. And I was at a conference, and there was a gentleman speaking there, and he was a Yupik, and he was in his late 60s, early 70s at the time. And he was a Yupik man who was raised off the coast of Alaska on a small island. And when he was raised, when he was a young teenager, he was one of the last couple of hundred people left on that island, because the exodus to the mainland had started to occur. And so he was one of the few people who were left, and it was mostly old people, the elders, and a couple of young people. And he was one of them. And so there was that whole generational thing going on. And he was out one day, and he heard that the mask maker on the island had passed. And so he was like, what? The mask maker is gone? Like, there are no other mask makers on the island. Like, what are we going to do? So he went home and he talked to his grandparents, and he said, the mask maker died. Like, the mask maker is gone. Like, what are we going to do? We have to do something. We have to make sure that our culture and our language and everything that we have doesn't disappear. There are no other mask makers on the island. Everybody's gone to the mainland. What are we going to do? So they're like, yeah, youthful exuberance, go do something, go tell somebody else. So he went, and he was trying to convince all of these people on the island that he knew the mask maker had just passed, and what are we going to do? And so he was talking to one elderly man, and the elderly man said, go see the healer, go see the medicine man, go see the old man. And so he's like, well, what do you mean? He goes, just go see him. He'll talk to you. And so he went to see this old healer man, this elder in the community, the one who was taking care of people's, I guess, spiritual health. And he was telling him, I've been trying to convince everybody and nobody will listen to me. The mask maker is gone. We don't have any other mask makers. What's going to happen when the songs are gone, when the canoes are gone, when the dances are gone? Like, what's going to happen when we have no more art? Like, this is starting to disappear and there's nobody here. They're all gone to the mainland. We're losing everything. And the old man just went, it's okay. Go get me a seal. He's like, what? He's like, go get me a seal. He's like, did you hear what I just said? We're in trouble. Like, what are we gonna do? He said, go get me a seal. And so he was like, the 16-year-old going out onto the ice. He's so disappointed. He's so angry. Like, he's so frustrated. You know how we all feel. We're so frustrated. What are we gonna do? And so he has a spear, and I don't know if anybody, I've never hunted seal, but I don't know if anybody knows how to hunt seal, but you go out onto the ice and see a seal will come up in an air hole that's in the ice, and he'll breathe into the air hole and then he'll go back down. So you have to stand there with your spear and wait for the seals to feel like it's safe enough to come up to the air hole. And so here he is, and he's standing by the ice and he's waiting. And it's an hour, and it's 3 hours, and it's 5 hours, and it's 6 hours. And he finally quiets down, and all of a sudden, he sees a mask. And then he hears a song. And then he sees the canoes, and he sees the dances, and he dreams of how his people lived. And it's all there. I always get emotional when I tell the story. It's so awesome. I just love it. But it's all within us. And how I usually start some of these classes is, we have everything inside of us. We have everything that we need to be who we are. We don't need the external to tell us anything. We have it all, and we can dream it back into existence. And we can express who we are in any way that we want, any way that we choose, because it's already all here. We can learn skills, we can gain skills and, learn how to hunt for seal and, learn how to do a projected budget spreadsheet, we can learn all of that stuff, but everything that we have is here already. And creation will know you no matter what. Creation knows you no matter what. She is here and she knows you, where no matter where you are, no matter where you go, creation knows you. And I liked what Cara said in the beginning, we're right where that you're right where you're meant to be. And we are all right where we are meant to be. And can we be gentler with ourselves about where that is or how we judge that to be? We are right where we are meant to be. And isn't that awesome? Isn't that amazing? So the title of what I was talking about was Contact Reimagined, right? Cara talked a little bit about colonization and first contact, and how the first settlers came in and they were guests, and then the second ones came in and they had more of the colonizer attitude. And that's the external coming in, right? That's the external coming in and us meeting the external, and it can look many different ways. But how do we meet ourselves? How do we make contact with ourselves? What does contact even really mean? Does anybody have an idea or a definition that they'd like to share about what contact means before I tell you what mine is? You can put it in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and just yell it out. What does contact mean? Come on, Candace, I know you have something to say.
You know me too well, Linda. Oh my. I think it's more along the lines of, as long as we have our connection, our being, who we are individually as human beings, we put out, we share what we have. When our heart is good, when our soul is pure, when we want to do the work that we have to do and help our people, help our nation, help our communities, you have to come from a really good place in order to make a difference, even just a small little piece. But that connection has to start with you as a human being, yourself, right?
Yeah.
And then whatever you put out into the universe.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you, Candace. Whatever you put out, and Brenda says, you know, meeting someone new. So putting out, meeting someone new. Kim says the values we base our own lives on and what we live by through all time, how we connect with ourselves and share with others. Our gifts are meant to share. Yes, how we connect with ourselves and how we share with others. So to me, contact is to touch. And we all know that to be whole, in holistic, it means many different things, right? It means emotionally, physically, spiritually, intellectually, all of these things, right? To touch in all ways that we are and to have a dialogue. So how do we touch and have a dialogue with ourselves? How does that work? And how can that be the basis for moving forward with all of the other relationships in our lives? Because what we're talking about is relationship, right? Cara was talking about the relationships, the mentors, how each community was in relationship with each other, how they were putting all of these things based on a community-led initiative that met the needs of the community, which is what we're all here to do, right? So how can we do it for ourselves? One of my teachers said that he learned something from his 8-year-old son one time, and the 8-year-old son said, if we can't feel, are we even alive? If we can't feel anything, are we even alive? And he was like, wow, what a great question. So if we cannot feel, are we even really alive? And I would also like pose to you, if you're not feeling someplace in your body, you're not occupying that place, you're not embodying that place. So you're not there. And how can we embody or occupy as much of ourselves as we can? Make contact with ourselves. We've been sitting on a chair for the past hour and a half, right? What are our butts saying to us right now? They're definitely communicating to us, right? You know, maybe we need to use the washroom. It's been a while. It's been, you know, we came on at 1 and we're leaving at 2:30. What is our bladder communicating to us? Everything in our body is communicating to us, and it's information for us to use to move forward in a way that we desire, in accordance with what we want in our lives. And we are the role models for all of those people and things as we move out in those ripples, concentric rings, however you want to see it, you know, in our families. I like to tell the story. We do Rites of Passage here in Garunya for girls. We haven't done it in the past year, obviously, but it's a 4-year program and it ends with a 4-night fast, 1 night, 2 nights, 3 nights, 4 nights. And we teach about relationship with yourself from a cultural perspective, using a cultural context and moving outward to others. And one year we had 4 generations of women supporting one girl. And a lot of times some of the girls didn't want to participate because they're teenagers and they didn't want to be every Sunday, you know, at this program learning about who they are. And some of them quit. And the mothers would come afterwards and they would say, can we still come? Even if she doesn't? Because we never got this growing up. and they were making contact. They were learning to make contact with themselves and with others in a way that they had never learned in their life, and they wanted to continue to feel that. They were feeling something for the first time in their lives that they never felt before. So what does that mean? What does that mean to have all of these feelings? We spend so much of our lives, numbing off those negative, I don't think it's positive or negative, but the feelings that we don't want to feel, that we also get rid of the ones that we do. Because you can't choose shutting down anger or rage and not shutting down joy and happiness, because you have it all goes together. And I really loved what Dr. Stan, I love Dr. Stan, what you talk about all the time. I just could listen to you all day. Language comes from the land. Everything comes from the land. We are the land. And culture, culture is a manifestation of our physical environments. That's why on the West Coast you have cedar and big houses, and up north you have different things, and in the east you have salmon and different things, and we have white pine and longhouses. It's what's around us. It's in part, the physical manifestation is what is around us, so that we can create these mnemonic devices to teach values and principles to our children, to our descendants from our ancestors. Right? What Cara said, revitalizing the happiness of our ancestors. We're the bridge that takes all of that revitalization, what we want to revitalize from those ancestors, and carries it to the future, to our children and our grandchildren, and hopefully our grandchildren's grandchildren, because at the same time, we are the ancestors. We are the ancestors of that generation that will be looking back and say, what did we do? How did we, what did they learn from us? So what is the legacy that we want to leave? To me, I want to know that I was fully who I am as much as possible. Who I am, and whatever that means, because that's all I can be, and that's all I can do. And there's so much I want to say. Oh my God. There's a ceremony that we have in our culture called something like that, lifting the name up. And what we do is, when a baby is born and they are given a name, they're brought to the longhouse in a ceremony to lift their name up, basically to introduce them to everybody in the community. And what we say is, here is this baby, and we don't know what the gifts will be of this baby fully right now. We can kind of tell, kind of cute, this little girl or boy, this is what they're gonna be good at. Our healers can speculate, but we don't know everything about this child. And so each of you, the leaders, this is your responsibility to this child, and this is this child's responsibility to you. The clan mothers, the men, the women, the children, the family, the immediate family, the parents, the siblings. This is your responsibility to this child, and this is the child's responsibility to you. Creation, all of creation, this is your responsibility to this child, and this is this child's responsibility to you, because it's a relationship. It's a relationship that we have with each other, so that we can all be authentically and fully who we are, to be using the gifts that we were given to live this life on this earth. Because I think all too often people think that in order to be equal, they have to pull people down to their level. In our communities, there's lots of lateral violence, but really it's the opposite, right? It's to allow people to be fully who they are, and to allow ourselves to be fully who we are. And that's where the equity exists, in creation, in the holistic, to be whole. I had healer tell me one time when they were questioned, what does it mean to be traditional? What does it mean to be whole? What does it mean to be well? And they said, we physically take things in, we physically release them. We emotionally, we take things into our heart, and we have to release them. We have to move those emotions through our body. Intellectually, mentally, we take ideas in and we discard the ones that we don't need anymore. And spiritually, we learn about all of these things, and then we let that move through us and let us let go of what we no longer need or what doesn't serve us. And that's really, I mean, in a nutshell, what I wanted to talk about. I could talk all day, but I do want to say that we are all right where we're meant to be. You know, we want to move away from talking about scarcity and start talking about abundance. We want to move away from talking about weakness and talk about our strengths. We want to move away from talking about needs and talk about our assets. You know, we want to get onto the land. Get onto the land and let her teach you. I teach primitive skills and I teach tracking. I'm a tracking student, and I teach healing at a healing school in North Carolina, and I have a healing practice here. And when I use healing in my work, I mean, when I use tracking in my work, it's so interesting because you walk in a tracking box through some sand, you know, or snow or whatever, and your footsteps, your footprints are what the earth is reflecting back to you in terms of who you are in that moment. And who are you walking through 2 inches of snow or 4 inches of sand or 2 feet of snow or in a swamp? And how do your psychologies change when you're given in different situations? And so if I can see and read that track, you know, if I can read all of these tracks here in front of me, you know, based on what the earth is telling you in that moment, then I can reflect back what I see and maybe help you change your perspective about who you are. And then when you walk through that tracking box again, it's different. Who you are changes. And it's just that small, tiny little choice that makes all of the difference. So I know we have until 2:30. It's 2:50 now, and I know that there are questions that you probably want to ask Cara, hopefully, and myself. So 2 more minutes. Yeah, 2 more minutes. But I think that's really what I wanted to say in a nutshell. I mean, I could talk forever, all day, every day. But I really want you to think about all of these things that we want to accomplish that Cara talked about. How do we feel all of that in ourselves? How do we occupy or inhabit or embody everything that we are? Feel all of our emotions, feel our feelings, you know, feel our feelings and move those emotions through our body, and then listen to what they're communicating so that we can be who we are. And then we can also recognize it in other people and see where they're coming from and see what, you know, have some compassion as to the pain that they're in or what they're feeling or what their feelings are communicating to them. And it just creates more understanding, and it creates that reciprocity that's needed in relationship. And how does each of our cultures do that through the different devices or mnemonic devices or things that we use in all of our cultures? We all have ways that we do it. And it's so beautiful that we can use all of these different ways in our cultures to help teach our people to remember who we are, because it's already all here. We're already everything that we are, have been, ever will be. Our ancestors are living here. Our descendants are living here. The earth is here. We are the earth. We are the land. Everything is here. We just need to remember. So thank you so much for having me, and I will turn it over for questions or whatever our organizers would like to do. Yeah, go.
Thank you so much, Linda. You say you could talk all day, but I have no doubt that all of us here could happily listen. That was beautiful. Thank you so much for being here. I think let's remove the spotlight actually so that we can all see each other. And just a reminder is that we are recording the session. So if you want to go to gallery view, if you don't want your video to be shown on the recording, you're welcome to turn your video off. But just a reminder, we are recording it so that we can circulate the link to the presentations after. We have just shy of 10 minutes left for questions. So I'm going to open the floor. I'm going to put myself on mute. We have Cara and Linda here, happy to answer any questions you might have about presentations or about your own initiatives in community with land-based healing. So feel free to ask in French or English. You can raise your hand. Like physically, you can raise your hand on the Zoom chat. You can type your question into the chat itself. So I'm going to mute myself now, and then we'll go to closing comments in about 8 minutes. Francine, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Cara, I was just wondering, when you were doing your presentation, how long did that all take to get to that final plan, and how much of it exists today?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question, Francine. So I began at the Health Caucus in 2019. COVID hit about 6 months after I had started. And so we went into entire response to COVID mode. And so I had no focus for some time on the land-based healing aspect. And then, as I mentioned, I presented this idea to leadership and health directors to build this center that they totally shut down in the summertime. And so that was about July. So I'm like, okay, I got to totally rework how we're going to do this. And so from about July of 2020 to March of 2021, we accomplished all of those things that I shared. And so it was a matter of distributing the funds, hearing from communities what they wanted to do with that fund so I can identify those as priorities in the plan. Met with all the communities virtually to get those graphic recordings together to pull out more of what they wanted to see and what their needs and priorities were. Rolled out the mentor apprentice program and had that for just under the year. And then also started building the plan as we were doing all that. So I would say, like, gosh, what is that? Like July, like 8 to 9 months, I would say that all happened in. So it was a really short time frame, but we were moving fast to make sure that we used all of the funding that we were given from the First Nations Health Authority to really lay that foundation of what land-based healing meant to us so that we could receive the next allotment of funding to really implement what that was going to look like. And so I just had visited Williams Lake First Nation in September and saw how far their healing center has come up since then. And so within a year, they're continuing to build more and more within that healing space, as well as other communities, and still hearing from the mentors and apprentices how meaningful that program was to them, that it helped. I remember this one mother, she said, my daughter has anxiety and she really struggles to go out and do things, but that program really motivated her to be out. And she said how much it helped her to be out on the land and to do those things. And so they're eagerly waiting for it to start up again. And so our nation right now has just received more funding to continue on a lot of this work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Francine. Cara, we have a question in the chat for you as well. Lisa's asking where she can find the graphic recordings for all the Secwepemc communities, in particular Adams Lake. So I wonder maybe, Cara, if you actually wouldn't mind putting your email again in the chat. Yeah. And then maybe Lisa, you can connect directly with Cara for that graphic recording. And we have confirmed that Cara is happy to for us to send out her slide presentation after. I know it was hard to read some of that, so we'll make sure that we send it out following the session with the recording for everyone to read through. We've got a few more minutes. Kim, go ahead.
Just want to thank the two ladies for the presentations today. Linda, I just wanted to reaffirm and attest to one of the statements that you made in regards to our tradition and our knowledge is within us. And if we are open to receive it, we will recognize it. Just a short little story, take me 30 seconds. My daughter and I attended our first moon ceremony last May. And when we were there was a lot of emotion in the area. And my daughter kept saying that she wanted to stop by the lake on her way home. And I didn't understand why. And she told me like 3 times. And so when we left, we stopped by the lake. She reminded me, don't forget to stop. And when we stopped there, she got out of the car and she went to the lake. She put her hands in the water and she was talking to the water. And when she came back, I asked her what she was doing. And she said that she needed to reconnect. She needed to balance herself back out. And she's 10 years old. So I really believe that, you know, what you say is definitely a reality. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I just would like to encourage everyone. You know, a lot of times we feel things and we're like, that's too stupid. I'm not going to do that. I feel dumb. It's totally not dumb. You know, if you feel it, you know, get curious about it. You know, you don't have to run naked through the fields. You know, you could just put your hands in the water and reconnect. You know, it's interesting to see what comes up when you just put a little bit of curiosity there rather than fear or judgment.
Thank you. That's something that one of our Alderhill colleagues, Elaine Alec, always says is when in doubt, go to the water. So that's a bit of a mantra within our team for sure. Victoria, why don't we go to you? This will be our last question. And then I would love to invite Brenda to do some closing comments and a prayer. So Victoria.
Thank you, Kate. First of all, I'd like to commend both ladies on the authenticity of your presentations. I could really feel your true selves speaking about what you care about. Linda, thank you so much for filling my spirit this morning just by listening to you. I really felt a feeling, you know, that, you know, you don't really know you quite need until somebody's giving it to you. So thank you so much for that. Cara, what I thought was really one thing that impacted me with your presentation that I just wanted to share was when you talked about the funding and that the funding was available for all of the population. And to me, that was a huge thing. I was like sitting here and clapping my hands because land-based healing is not just for people on reserve. We've had talks in Manitoba about decolonization, and the elders had mentioned that decolonization is including your entire population in all the funding agreements to take care of everybody in your community across the board from no matter where they live. So to hear that practice with your land-based healing, I think that is absolutely spot on. And so obvious, right? But to have somebody like to do it and say, you know, we've done it over here, it's a great pathway for others to start following, hopefully. So thank you. Great job with the work that you did. I'm really impressed with everything. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much, Victoria. And totally, like, I think we talk about it so much, but we just have to do it. And that was what it was with our nation. We have these communities and we had their whole population numbers and everything. And this really amazing finance person who had this formula they developed based on rural and remoteness, the whole population. And there was another piece. And so we just put it in this Excel spreadsheet and it's like, okay, this is what everyone's going to get. And that's us using our self-determination from a nation level to be like, this is what we're doing with the funding. Our funders will have to accept that because it's up to us, right? And so totally, I encourage folks to be creative and work with what they're receiving as best they can to ensure that it is meeting the needs of everyone within their communities that live in community or away from community. And that was a really great part of the Mentor Apprentice program too, that reached so many folks from all over. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you so much, everyone. Unfortunately, our hour and a half went way too quickly this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. So I just want to say a really heartfelt thank you again to Dr. Wilson for opening us up in such a beautiful way this morning and for smudging with us, even virtually. I think we can all feel it. It was really beautiful. Thank you so much. Cara, I just love you. You're an inspiration. Your presentation was amazing. I'm really looking forward to sending it out so everyone can learn more about the detail behind this incredible work you've done. And Linda, like Victoria said, I think you really lifted my spirit this morning today. So I'm so, so grateful. And thank you to everyone who tuned in from across multiple time zones. It's a bit of a feat. And I really want to thank our two interpreters. We have Mike and Caroline, who have been working really hard to make sure that this is accessible for French speakers and English speakers today. Thanks again to ISK Manitoba, Catherine, Victoria, our Alderhill team. We're really, really grateful. Stay tuned for a post-session questionnaire. We would love to plan one in the new year, depending on feedback that we receive from all of you. We'd love to cater this to the communities. So please feel free to give us feedback and tell us exactly what you want to see from this speaker series. And I would love now to invite Brenda Morrison, who has graciously offered to close us out with a closing prayer. So Brenda, I'm going to spotlight you for the group. And thanks again, everybody.
Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, thank you. It's my honor to be asked to say the closing prayer. To both ladies who shared today, I want to say Kichimigwech for sharing from your heart. It's very inspiring to go on the land and to find a reconnection to one's spirit there. I feel very happy to have this opportunity to listen to you today. So I invite you all to pray with me as we close our gathering for today, for all the people listening here today. Dear Creator God, we give you thanks today for all the people that worked hard to bring this gathering together so we could connect through the internet. It's nice to see all the people, and we ask you to bless them all wherever they are in their lives, with their families and on their lands. Help us to stay connected even though we are distant apart. I ask you to be with us as we continue to do the work for our communities, for our people, to gain that self-determination, to do what we want to do in our own special way with the gifts that you gave us, Creator. We give you thanks for everything that you bestow upon us. Until we come again, we ask you to keep everybody safe, to give us the wisdom and the way to reconnect with the people in a respectful and loving way. For this we pray. Kichimigwech Manitou. Amen. Thank you. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks so much, Brenda. Have a really fantastic day, everyone. We'll hopefully see you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.